Shadows in the Uwharrie. The ancient hills of the Uwharrie forest stretched endlessly into the North Carolina twilight, their rolling peaks softened by millennia of erosion. What had once been mountains now stood as gentle giants, their weathered faces covered in a thick canopy of oak, hickory, and pine. Deep in their heart, where the old mining roads gave way to forgotten trails, four friends had made their camp. "This place gives me the creeps," Sarah muttered, poking at the fire with a charred stick. Sparks danced upward, joining the first stars beginning to pierce the darkening sky. "I mean, look at it. It's like something out of a horror movie." Marcus laughed, his voice echoing off the surrounding trees. "That's just the history talking. These hills are old, Sarah. Really old. The Cherokee hunted here for thousands of years before the first European settlers arrived. Then came the gold miners in the 1800s, digging shafts and tunnels everywhere. This whole forest is basically one giant graveyard of forgotten dreams." "Thanks for that comforting thought," Elena said dryly, zipping up her jacket against the cooling air. She glanced around their small clearing, noting how the firelight barely penetrated the wall of trees surrounding them. "Remind me why we chose the most isolated campsite possible?" "Because Jake insisted we needed the authentic wilderness experience," Sarah replied, making air quotes with her fingers. "Where is he anyway?" "He's been gone for almost an hour." Marcus checked his watch, its digital face glowing green in the firelight. "He said he was just going to gather more firewood. The trail's clearly marked. He can't get lost." But even as he said it, a chill ran down his spine. The Uwharrie might not be as vast as some national forests, but it was dense, and in the dark, even familiar trails could become mazes. The old mining operations had left behind a network of abandoned roads and paths that twisted through the hills like a spider's web. More than one hiker had spent an unplanned night in these woods. Elena stood up, brushing off her jeans. "I'm going to call out for him. Maybe he's just nearby and lost track of time." "Jake!" she shouted, her voice carrying through the trees. "Jake, where are you?" The forest swallowed her call, and for a moment the only sound was the crackling of their fire. Then from somewhere in the darkness beyond their circle of light came a response. Not Jake's voice, but something else entirely. A low rhythmic tapping, like wood striking wood, echoing through the trees. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, moving closer to the fire. Marcus held up a hand for silence, straining to listen. The tapping came again, 3 deliberate strikes, followed by a pause, then 3 more. It seemed to be coming from the direction Jake had gone, but it was impossible to tell exactly where in the dense forest. "Maybe it's Jake," Elena said hopefully. "Maybe he's trying to signal us." But the sound was wrong somehow. Too methodical, too purposeful. Jake would have called out, would have used his voice. This was something else. The tapping stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving them in a silence that felt heavier than before. The normal sounds of the forest, the rustle of small animals, the whisper of wind through leaves, had disappeared entirely, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. "Okay, that's it," Marcus said, reaching for his backpack. "I'm getting the flashlight and going to look for him." As he rummaged through his gear, Sarah grabbed his arm. "Look," she whispered, pointing toward the tree line. At the very edge of their firelight, where the orange glow faded into black, something moved. Not the quick, darting movement of an animal, but something slower, more deliberate. A shadow that seemed to shift and flow between the trees, always just beyond the reach of the light. "Did you see that?" Elena's voice was barely audible. They all stared at the spot where the movement had been, but now there was nothing, just the impenetrable wall of darkness that surrounded their small island of light. The fire popped and hissed, sending up a shower of sparks that briefly illuminated the nearest trees before fading away. "It's probably just our eyes playing tricks on us," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The firelight creates optical illusions, makes you see things that aren't there." But even as he spoke, the tapping began again. This time it was closer, and it seemed to be moving, circling their campsite just beyond the reach of their vision. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Pause, the rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the rocky ground. "I don't like this. Something's wrong." Jake should have been back by now. And this isn't normal. Elena nodded, her usual skepticism replaced by growing unease. Maybe we should pack up and leave. We can come back for Jake in the morning with park rangers. We can't just abandon him, Marcus protested, but his words were cut short by a new sound, a long, low whistle that seemed to come from directly above them. All three looked up at the canopy of branches overhead, but the darkness was too complete to see anything. The whistle came again, longer this time, starting high and dropping to a bass note that they felt in their chests as much as heard. "That's not human," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "That's not Jake." The fire began to dim, the flames sinking lower despite the pile of wood they'd built up. Marcus quickly grabbed another log and threw it on, sending up a burst of sparks and light that pushed back the darkness. In that brief moment of illumination, they all saw it. A figure standing just at the edge of the trees, tall and impossibly thin, its features obscured by shadow. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there watching them. Then the flames settled, the light dimmed, and it was gone. "Did you all see that?" Elena whispered. Before anyone could answer, Jake's voice cut through the night, but it was wrong. Too high, too strained, and coming from the wrong direction entirely. "Help me," the voice called. "I'm lost. I can't find the way back." But the voice was coming from above them, from the canopy of trees where no human could possibly be. "That's not Jake," Marcus said, his hands shaking as he reached for his phone. No signal. They were too deep in the forest, too far from any cell tower. The fake Jake voice called again, and now it was coming from their left, then their right, then from behind them. Each time it sounded exactly like their friend, but the words were always the same. "Help me, I'm lost. I can't find the way back." Something's mimicking him, Elena realized, her face pale in the firelight. Something heard him, and now it's using his voice. The tapping resumed, faster now, more urgent. It seemed to be coming from all around them, as if multiple sources were creating the rhythm. And with it came other sounds. The crack of breaking branches, the whisper of movement through undergrowth, the soft pad of footsteps circling their camp. Sarah grabbed the poker from beside the fire, holding it like a weapon. "What do we do? What do we do?" Marcus forced himself to think, to push past the fear that was threatening to overwhelm him. "The car," he said. "We need to get to the car. We can come back with help." But their car was parked at the trailhead, a good half-mile hike through the dark forest. The thought of leaving their circle of light, of venturing into the darkness where those shadows waited, was almost paralyzing. The fake Jake voice called out again, but this time it was different. Instead of the plea for help, it was laughing, a sound that started as Jake's familiar chuckle, but gradually distorted into something inhuman, something that went on far too long and rose to a pitch that made their teeth ache. "We have to move," Elena said, grabbing her backpack. "We can't stay here." Marcus nodded, pulling out his flashlight and checking the batteries. The beam was bright but seemed pathetically small against the vast darkness of the forest. "Stay close together. Don't get separated no matter what." They began to pack quickly, throwing their essential gear into their backpacks. The fire was their lifeline, their protection, but they couldn't carry it with them. As they prepared to leave their circle of safety, the sounds from the forest grew louder. More tapping, more movement, and underneath it all, a low humming that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. "Ready?" Marcus asked, shouldering his pack. They nodded, forming a tight group with Marcus and his flashlight in the lead. As they stepped away from the fire, the darkness seemed to rush in around them like water filling a void. The flashlight beam illuminated the trail ahead, but it also created deeper shadows on either side, shadows that seemed to move and shift with a life of their own. They had gone perhaps 50 yards when they heard it, the sound of someone running through the forest behind them, crashing through the undergrowth with desperate, panicked steps. "Wait!" Jake's voice called out. "Wait for me! Don't leave me!" They stopped, torn between the need to help their friend and the growing certainty that whatever was calling to them wasn't Jake at all. "It's not him," Elena said firmly. "Jake wouldn't have gotten lost. He knows these woods." But the voice was so convincing, so perfectly reproduced, that for a moment they all wavered. Then Marcus made the decision for them, pushing forward along the trail. We keep moving. The running footsteps behind them grew closer, and now they could hear breathing, heavy, labored, but wrong somehow, like air being forced through a pipe rather than lungs. Whatever was pursuing them was gaining ground. They broke into a run, their flashlight beam bouncing wildly as they hurried along the narrow trail. Branches whipped at their faces, and roots tried to trip them, but they pressed on, driven by a primal fear that went deeper than rational thought. Behind them, the breathing grew louder, and with it came a new sound, the scrape of something being dragged across the ground, like claws or fingernails scratching against stone. "There," Sarah shouted, pointing ahead. "I can see the parking area." The beam of their flashlight caught the reflective surface of their Honda Civic, parked alone in the small dirt lot. They ran toward it like drowning people swimming for shore, fumbling for the keys as they reached the car. Marcus's hands shook as he unlocked the doors, and they all piled in, slamming the doors behind them. He started the engine, and the headlights blazed to life, illuminating the trailhead and the edge of the forest beyond. For a moment, everything was normal, just trees and darkness in the familiar interior of their car. Then Sarah screamed. Standing directly in front of the car, caught in the full glare of the headlights, was Jake. But something was wrong with him. He was too tall, his limbs too long, his face a pale blur of features that didn't quite fit together properly. And he was smiling, a wide, impossible smile that seemed to stretch from ear to ear. "Why did you leave me?" the Jake thing asked, its voice carrying clearly through the closed windows of the car. "I was calling for you. I was lost." Marcus threw the car into reverse, spinning the wheel hard. The headlights swept across the forest as they turned, and in that brief moment of illumination, they saw them. Dozens of figures standing among the trees, all tall and wrong, all wearing the faces of people they might have known. The car shot backward out of the parking area and onto the dirt road that led back to civilization. In the rearview mirror, Marcus caught a glimpse of the figures emerging from the forest, moving with that same flowing, unnatural gait they had seen by the campfire. They drove in silence for several miles, following the winding road through the dark hills. It wasn't until they reached the main highway, with its reassuring streetlights and traffic, that anyone spoke. "What were those things?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Marcus replied, his hand still gripping the steering wheel. "But they weren't human." Elena pulled out her phone, relieved to see bars appearing on the screen as they got closer to town. "We need to call the police. Report Jake missing." But even as she dialed, a terrible thought occurred to her. What if the real Jake was still out there in the forest? What if those things had taken him, replaced him with something else? What if they had left him behind to save themselves? The phone rang in her ear, and when the dispatcher answered, she found herself struggling to explain what had happened. How do you tell someone that your friend disappeared in a forest full of shadows that wore human faces? They would search, of course. In the morning, when the sun rose over the ancient hills of the Uwharrie, teams of rangers and volunteers would comb the trails looking for any sign of Jake. They would find their abandoned campsite, the fire burned down to cold ashes, their gear scattered around the clearing. But they would find no trace of Jake himself, no sign of where he had gone or what had happened to him. The three friends would give their statements, describing what they had seen and heard. The officials would nod sympathetically and speak of stress and imagination, of how the isolation and darkness of the forest could play tricks on the mind. They would suggest that Jake had simply gotten lost, that he would turn up eventually, disoriented but unharmed. But deep down, Marcus, Elena, and Sarah knew the truth. They had seen something in those woods that didn't belong to the natural world, something that had been hiding in the shadows of the Uwharrie for longer than anyone could remember. The Cherokee had known about it, and the miners had whispered about it around their own campfires more than a century ago. Some places are older than human memory, older than human understanding. In the heart of the Uwharrie forest, where the ancient hills hold secrets in their weathered stone, there are things that watch and wait and occasionally reach out to touch the world of the living. Jake never came home. The search was called off after 2 weeks, and eventually the case was filed away with all the other unexplained disappearances that happen in wild places. His family held a memorial service, and his friends tried to move on with their lives. But sometimes on quiet nights when the wind is just right, hikers in the Uwharrie forest report hearing strange sounds echoing through the trees, tapping, whistling, and occasionally the sound of someone calling for help in a voice that seems familiar but isn't quite right. The forest remembers, and it's always listening. The end.